combining her 17 years of experience in cybersecurity, business strategy, diversity and inclusion, and executive coaching. Prachee helps introverted techies navigate the CEO and the boardroom, translating their work and shining amongst their peers without compromising who they are. Get ready to learn from the best as we dive into Prachee's entrepreneurial journey, navigating the ups and downs of growing a business in the ever evolving world of cybersecurity.
Indeed.
Prachee, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sabir.
So, I, I deal with superheroes all the time, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
those are my guests on the show, and we've had almost 100 of them, right? So, what's your superhero story? So, if you could share your background and how you got
Yeah.
into the field of cybersecurity.
I'll answer the second part first. I was very intrigued with cybersecurity when I was 16. I'd grabbed my hands on an ethical hacking book, which at the time when you're 16 growing up in India, you really don't have a lot of freedom to go anywhere. So the idea of getting into people's homes and computers, just sitting on my bed was absolutely appealing to me. And so that was my first foray. So I learned all of that. And eventually, a few months later, I realized, oh, shoot, if I can get in here, people with malintent can really can really wreak havoc about this. And so that's sort of when I appreciated sort of how bad this can get. Since then, and I'm a nerd too. So, I've always been a little bit of a techie and a science geek. So I really liked the idea of keeping learning about it, about cybersecurity in general. So that was when I was 16. That was multiple years ago. As you see, I've had now 17 years of work experience. And so fast forward, all of the different areas that I've worked in, cybersecurity technology, executive coaching, diversity, inclusion, business strategy has been extremely important in my growth as well. Combining all of that and bringing it to cybersecurity was a tremendous joy, uphill battle to some extent, but it's been really an interesting experience. So I actually wrote an article about Wonder Woman and cybersecurity. So if I were to pick my superhero or heroine, it would be Wonder Woman. And I like her journey of how she discovers who she is as she goes on, right? There's a little bit of brashness in the beginning. I can take over the world. And as she grows throughout the film, you see how she comes about and she understands her purpose, how she's contributing. And there's love and there's loss along the way. So I think that's a journey I definitely resonate with.
Since Elon Musk has taken over the Iron Man character,
Yes.
and most people call me Batman. So that's what
Really?
most people call me Batman. Gary Vee calls me Yoda.
Okay, Yoda's good. Yoda's good, definitely. Batman too, you're in the Gotham City, so you're fine.
Yeah. But I personally like Yoda. I relate to
Yeah,
him. I really like,
I think all of us
sharing the
do.
wisdom and sharing,
Yes,
and being thoughtful and insightful. That's
yes,
better for me than
yes,
fighting people and
yeah,
with gadgets, So that's definitely not me.
yes. Yoda
So
is the voice you want in your head.
yeah, there are voices there. We don't want to talk about that on this show right now.
No.
So I mean, in your bio, I
Mhm.
read out the Think, Design, and Cyber, right?
Yes, yes.
How did that idea come about, and what services does your company offer? I think you went through a journey there to
Yes.
get to this point.
Yeah, Think.Design.Cyber has really come across, as I started combining my experience, say, what can I pick from all the experiences I've done? I realized, holy cow, my process of my career process ended up through a process of elimination. And, if you see all these four areas on the surface seem very disconnected, right? But in essence, for cybersecurity, somehow the pieces started falling in place. Business strategy, you learn a lot about innovation, right? Growing your company. That's where the design thinking piece came in from. So the word design is really derived from design thinking. And the think is really around the people aspect, right? The mindset, the process of change. How do you grow, right? Everything we learn about as we are becoming entrepreneurs as well, right? Fixed to growth mindset, things like that. So, and in cybersecurity, a big item that's missing is systems thinking, critical thinking, and design thinking. So this was my creative brain saying, okay, think is part of the place where we talk about the people change, which is extremely important. And design is really around design thinking. that has brought innovation to so many other fields, right? Everything from what we're doing on our streaming channel right now to the phone to all these different technological advancement, and especially industrial grade, right? Think about assembly lines, think about large scale airport construction, things like that, right? So all of that was born out of some level of design thinking. People thought outside the box. And after we won our article, which was titled Cybersecurity, the End Game, this was during the year of COVID. We'd written it the year before. And when I say we, I mean my sweetheart and my partner in this endeavor, Brian Bernier. He's a co-founder as well. That was my one manifestation wish come true, was being able to work with my partner on something great, and we're equal parts nerd there. So we wrote this article. It won the Article of the Year award, and we were like, wow, this is great. Let's do
Congratulations.
something. Thank you. So that was the part one. And that sort of, all of these things putting together, we whiteboarded some stuff. And I came up with a creative name saying, let's put thinking people together, systems thinking, design thinking. Let's design some new outcomes and, some new impact in the cybersecurity space. And that's where the word cyber came from. So that's how it's called, Think.Design.Cyber. And what we're doing now over the last couple of months, because of the feedback we've gotten around the introverts and the interest, we're going to launch a Think.Design.Cyber Leaders Hub, focusing specifically on the leadership and the people aspect of growing people in cybersecurity.
So I'll share a little bit of a kind of a personal story with you related to the field. And I'm going to ask you a question related to it.
Mm-hmm.
So a few years ago, because I think my audience knows how old I am. I'm 50, right? So a few years ago, I graduated from college. And the degree I got was a computer science degree, a BA in computer science. When we started with the first course in college, in that first course, a 101 course, you had multiple sections, and each was given in a lecture hall, 250 students, big number, gigantic number. So you had 1,000 students in there, right?
Wow.
In that, for that 101 class. Queens College is where I came out of, so that's quite a lot, right? Then you go from 101 to 103 class, which is the second class in the sequence. That 1,000 goes down to maybe 2 sections, and it's 25 each, and it's 50 people. Right?
Oh, wow.
There's a morning section and a night section.
Wow.
And computer science is a hard field to get into.
It is.
Right?
It is. Yeah.
By the time after 103 was over, when in the sophomore year, we went to 201 class, which is the second year class that you go to. It's one class, one section, and it's like 20 people in there.
The funnel is like, phew. Yeah.
It just goes down very quickly. And what's the makeup of that 20 people? Those 20 students in my classes, I got to know them because that was the group that I'm going to be knowing them going through that degree program. Most of them would be the same, So out of those 20, I would say that 15 or 17 would be men, boys, and 3 to 5 would be women. We go from 201 to 203 or 205. It gets down to 10 people, and then out of those 10 people, I mean, let me put some context into it. This was many years ago, right?
Yes.
This is before even internet was commercialized. So that's how long ago I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Out of those 10 people, you had maybe eight guys and 2 women. So some more women fell out of the class.
Yeah.
By the time you got to the third year 301 level class, the class was maybe 8 people. There's 1 or 2 women, and there are maybe 5. So my next question, by sharing that story with you, is why is it so important to have diversity and inclusion? This is a long way of asking this question.
Very good story, though. Yeah.
In 2023, because I personally experienced it. I personally experienced it. And I believe that, I know that since then, a lot has happened, and especially in the United States with the STEM program and stuff like that. A lot of that kind of stuff has happened, but I don't know, having a program versus actually encouraging women to be part of technology is 2 very different things.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So from your POV, especially with diversity and inclusion in the cybersecurity world, what are your thoughts?
So first and foremost, right, people think diversity and inclusion is an effort. So what I'm trying to preface it is diversity is a thing. It just exists, right? Even if I was with 5 other women, there is still diversity. 5 other women from my exact background, there is still diversity, right? So there is an intersection when we talk about diversity and what that really means. It's about our intersection, me as a woman, me as an Indian woman, me as an Indian woman staying in the US, right? And lots of other dimensions that I may have out of my personal journey, out of my genetic attributes, all those things, right? So when we say diversity, it exists no matter what group it is. It's just the slice of diversity you're starting to look at. So people think it's a diversity is a thing we have to create. No, it's not. It exists. It's about harnessing that. And the inclusion aspect is, okay, I'm in this group today. Do I feel like I belong here? Do I feel like I'm a part of this conversation? Do I feel like I'm a part of this effort? So for me, that's what diversity and inclusion means, right? Equity is everybody feeling like they have an equal access, right? So so there's a really nice picture somewhere that's been floating around on the internet. I don't know if you've seen it, but you know, giving a bicycle to everybody, right, is access, so that they can, let's say, ride across the city. So city bikes, but making bikes different according to different people's needs. So able-bodied people and people who don't have, who have special needs in terms of drive, so that is true equity, saying I need what I have what I require for my, for my needs. So that is true equity. So that's what I define it as. Now, similar to your story, that was pretty much my journey, right? I did my undergrad in IT in India. Everybody sort of goes through that. So that divide, is almost 50-50 going through college. There's a lot of women who graduate. Now, when I came to the US and I started working, I've never worked in India, I've only worked in the US. When I started working, I was a woman in technology, a woman who was a technologist, who was serving financial industry clients. So that's another male-dominated industry. And then I ended up in cybersecurity. So for me, it was like a triple
It's
whammy.
even further down.
Oh, totally. Tell me about it. And the amount of times I would walk into a room full of men, and suddenly, I have actually said it once, and I said, there is some serious diversity issue in this, gender diversity issue in this room. And they all burst out laughing because they suddenly realized it because I called it out. So those, experiences are there. I've been very lucky in that sense that, I've had supporters and mentors throughout, male, female, all gender identities alike. And so speaking of cybersecurity, I think you and I laid it out pretty much. And that's the same percentage right now. It's anywhere from 25% to, I think 40% is like a very nice number, depending on, again, which survey, where you look at it. There's a 2019 survey by a really good cybersecurity organization called ISC Squared. They're a global organization. For them, it was less than 30% globally. Different levels again, right? What happens specifically, just, speaking of gender, it's not just the education academic piece, right? It's also when women start to enter into the workforce. McKinsey's been doing some really good study over the last 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. As women start to, so the funnel there is like this way, right? Sideways. There's a lot of women entering, and then there's something called a broken rung. At the very first step, that first manager breakthrough role is where it's the hardest time, at least in the US corporate workforce, right? And then as you start going into the C-suite, then it blends again. Now, when you put in the cut of race or any other dimension in there, then those slices again slim down, right? So gender, ethnicity, race, all those different dimensions. So for women, it's a little bit of a twofold, right? Coming in, pipeline to begin with is there. Then there's these impediments in career itself around the growth aspect. So part of it is, how do we remove those impediments to help people from a gender perspective, but also other dimensions, right? Because those experiences, although individual, are still shared amongst, all different groups, right? You would have had your own experience coming as a person, who wasn't originally, who was, from another place, not originally from the US.
I had my challenges.
Absolutely, right? And it's gotten better over time, but it's also not fully done yet. So, people have felt different levels of problems there. And so that's what makes me very excited about including the diversity aspect as I'm starting to talk about introverts. So that's another inclusion on one side, right? So now it doesn't matter what gender, ethnicity, race, all those different dimensions you come in. Now you're pretty much being separated as introvert versus extrovert. And I call those affinity groups, right? Things that we people gravitate towards each other because of some affinity they share. And in the corporate workplace, the introvert and extrovert bias for extroverts, and then introverts feeling sort of left out or underserved is also quite rampant, and that has not been tapped quite a bit. So there's all those aspects that we can start looking at it. And something, when I did I'm still on my secondment at my full-time job, but that's something was I learned very nicely, and that was something I took away from my job, being immersed in that role and knowing what it takes behind the scenes to help advance the groups. And the biggest contribution, the diversity makes, right? Obviously, there's studies out there that shows it affects the bottom line, right? But besides that, just think about the collective intelligence that you can bring. So one of the things I also work on is developing diverse, high-performing teams. How do you take an existing team and really evolve it into a diverse, high-performing teams where people are actually, leveraging their unique intersectionality and bringing together and becoming a diverse, high-performing team? And that's a journey in and of itself, right? And so that's also something that we work on at Think.Design.Cyber. So I completely forgot the first question, so I'll quickly recap.
Okay.
You see, I'm so passionate about the topic, I started talking, but
no, that's fine. Prachee,
yeah.
What do you think about, because you actually sparked an idea in my head. How much of it is cultural conditioning? That's why I chose
majority.
the gender role, right? Because
Yes.
that's the first break.
Yes.
Besides, then within the gender, Caucasian female versus African American female, brown female, Asian female. That's a very much even. That's even, because the thing is, the numbers in my graduating computer science class, I didn't care if it was any woman. I cared about there was a woman.
Yeah.
And in our final graduation, the group that actually graduated, there were only 5 people.
Yes.
4 guys, 1 girl, 1 woman. That's it.
Wow. Yeah.
That was the group. Because but the reason I'm asking you that is, how much of it is cultural conditioning, where we are conditioned at the very young age that the boys are engineers and doctors and stuff, and women are nurses, maybe doctors, but into marketing. It's not. Engineering is never a question for them, and mathematics is not a thing for them. It's more like art. Because a lot of those biases come in even through language, even from your parents, when they say something like that, it conditions you. This is why you failed that first class science project or whatever. You believe that what your mom or dad told you, or your uncle or aunt told you, that's true. Maybe it is genetic. Maybe it's in my DNA not to pass this thing, which is completely not true.
No, it isn't. And you're so true. It is largely cultural conditioning. It's your family, it's the society, as well as media, right? The conditioning is at many different levels. And let's take gender, for example. Me growing up in India, if you look at it, the amount of engineers and doctors that's just, you either have engineers, doctors, lawyers, right? That are pretty much the top 3 professions or respected professions, right? And I grew up under that kind of pressure. And so that's very rampant. Scores are rampant. It's performance driven. So that's the one thing. And then this almost a conundrum, right? For in school, it's like performance, get your marks, get your schools. And then suddenly you're in that 16, 17, 18 years of age, and you start hearing about, you got to get married, you got to have kids, have them at a certain age, or even at work, right? And on the one side, it's like, you were taught to be nice or obedient and stuff like that, right? Many different cultures share these kind of, conditioning between men and women. Men about emoting, right? And it's not to say it's just women. Men have been conditioned many different ways as well, right? And so those same contributing factors. And then you come into a corporate workplace where suddenly it's like, you've got to market yourself, you got to talk about yourself, right? Or don't appear too nice, or it becomes a dog eat dog world. So there's all these concepts and templates and stories that have framed and inform who we are, right? It's our points of view. It's the judgments that people have offered. It's the conclusions we've come about ourselves, all subconscious, about what we can do, what we cannot do, what we should do, what we should not do, right? And what we're supposed to do. And suddenly it becomes this like mind-boggling situation to say, okay, so who am I? And like, what am I supposed to show up as, and what is good and bad, right? So 100% cultural conditioning is a big aspect of it. And when I'm working with clients, in fact, when you have mixed cultures, so this woman is a Caribbean Indian woman, but with I want to say an African American mom, or I forget which side, but it was a mix, right? So her lineage has been predominantly Indian, married into, the local Caribbean family there. And
Mhm.
both cultures now have, have affected who she is and how she's showing up at work. And frankly, some of that contradicts, and it really is a process. And on the other side, um, men here, right, are conditioned around not expressing your emotion, being macho, right? Some of the different communities, I mean, it's white as well as Latino, different levels, different degrees, and that distills into family and how crazy our families can be about making sure we adhere to those cultural conditioning. So
But how
and
much,
then
so Prachi, how much of it is now the other side of it? How much it is now you got to workplace, right?
Mhm,
You're
mhm.
entering as a junior cybersecurity specialist, right? Now
Yes.
you are getting into that field because you have the paperwork,
Yeah.
certificate, diploma, whatever.
Yep.
You aced the class and you got an incredible number. You're
Yeah.
a Indian cybersecurity woman, right?
Yeah.
Professional.
Yeah.
You go in there. How much of the other side of it being systematic exclusion now?
Yes.
Now you're in a
Yeah.
corporate setting, you versus a Caucasian male.
Yeah.
Maybe that person does not even have as much qualifications as you do, right? And you are more qualified for that. And
Yeah.
then there's a systematic exclusion because of that.
There is. I won't be able to put like an exact percentage because every organization is different. Yes, there is a systematic exclusion that happens, right? And part of it is, like you said, the word exactly, the biases, right? You automatically associate saying, "Oh, she's an Indian woman," and then what happens is very quickly our brains, because of the way they're wired, very quickly based on that bias, you make assumptions about this person, saying she may not be career oriented or she may not be,
She just got married and she's going to
articulate
have a
enough. Yeah,
kid.
maybe. Yeah, and it won't be said out loud, right? Because then
It
that's a
will be just
problem.
assumed.
It's assumed when some of those things, and then the woman in and of itself, right? Taught to be soft spoken, taught to be, you know, or if she is too outspoken, then she's aggressive, or pardon my French, bitch, right? Those are labels. So it's either you're too good or you're too bad, right? And so that sort of notion starts to happen, and different ethnic groups have their, come across their own biases. Yeah, and then the systemically, are some people at a greater advantage? Yes, because that's the network that exists there right now. If you have two or three of people we know more, right, and if they're more inclusive, then you've got a foot in the door. The other aspect of that is, because we are sort of newer into the workforce, coming from a more diverse background, right, navigating that what I call is in between competencies, because in many different companies they're like, oh, you've got to climb this leadership competency ladder to show that you're becoming a leader, you're growing. I call them in between competencies, because navigating that system also, right, understanding when you're truly being held back versus something that might be totally unintentional, that a person is, just biased and not even realizing they're doing it. Um, that discretion is a learned behavior. And it's sad that we have to carry it, but at some level you have to learn it.
Mm.
And then on the other side, when a lot of, in the last 2-3 years things happen, people made a proactive effort to learn about the experiences of people who didn't look, or didn't have the same life as them. So I think it's a two-part effort, but definitely there's systemic issues there.
Yeah. So going back to, you made a comment about introverts and extroverts earlier,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
another personal story, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Gary Vee and I are, it's known that him and I work together, right?
Hmm.
And we would
Hmm.
be in a meeting with clients, and for 30 minutes, in those 30 minutes, for 20 minutes or 15 minutes, Gary Vee would talk, right? He's an amazing speaker, motivational, as well as very
Yeah.
intelligent about
Yeah.
marketing, social, and all sorts of things like that. I would be in the same room, but I'm just consuming all of the
Yeah.
conversation that's happening, and I'm
Yes.
evaluating, in
Yes.
addition to my own deeper evaluation of what I want to say and meaningful. And in the final 10 minutes, I might talk about something meaningful. I
Hmm.
don't want to just talk just because I like to hear my own voice.
Yeah.
I would like for it to be impactful, and for it to be meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not saying one is wrong or the other one is right. That's not the
Yeah.
case. It's
Yeah.
just different,
Yeah. Yeah.
So when it comes to cybersecurity, like when I think about cybersecurity, it kind of reminds me of all sorts of like hacking type Hollywood movies.
Yes.
and where it shows you a black screen with green fonts, and each letter is this big for
Very
whatever reason.
stereotypical.
It has
Yes.
to
Yes.
it has to look big. That's an extrovert, in my opinion, versus the
Mm.
guy who's just sitting there with a hoodie on, and he's just sitting there quietly and just doing his business. And somehow the extrovert fails or whatever, and then the introvert says, "Okay, I took care of it." Doesn't even
Oh,
say a single thing in
interesting
that
perspective.
process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, I'm not saying, I mean, in different fields, I felt that, extroverts and introverts can win, but
Totally.
you need to create an environment where both need to be heard. One should not overpower the other one and,
Yes.
and shut the other
Yes.
person off. Because
Yes.
sometimes with the introverts, if they feel like they are getting shut down
Bulldog.
or not listened to, they just shut down completely,
Yes.
right? Which is
Yes.
bad, because the
Yes.
introverts their thoughts could be a lot more insightful than the loud mouth in the room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And and as you gave a personal example, I really discovered in the last couple of years since COVID, I'm actually more introvert than I am extrovert. But I'm sort of ambivert is where I kind of landed. But I was forced to become an extrovert, which I didn't realize until I went into the introspection, zone. Um, it was in my childhood, like you said, cultural conditioning, right? I was the oldest kid, and every time we had guests over at our home, so you got to go serve them, give them beverages, tea, talk to them. My brother and sister could get away with that. I couldn't. I had to show up, right? And it was almost like, nope, you got to develop your social skills, blah 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 blah. I became really good at it, but then I realized I love my alone time, right? Even in a relationship, some days it's like I just want to go out and walk into around New York City or sit in Central Park and just soak it up, or read a book and not talk to anybody, right? Just don't call me, don't text me, nothing. And it is true. And in cybersecurity, what happens is, or in any other field, right? Cybersecurity is just more concentration of introverts there. Ideally, across the population is 50-50 almost. um, so to your point, because extroverts are trained to talk, again, it's not intentional. Sometimes it's just like they just know how to blurt it out. Certain universities and even here in the US, they reward you for being able to be verbally expressive, right? So again, that's conditioning, make it educational system, whatever else. Those are self concepts too. To your point, absolutely, it's not right and wrong. So what I tell people, and you talked about CEO and boardroom, I actually call it charming the room. How do I teach introverts how to charm the room? So so part of it is, how do I use my introversion, right? What are my strengths as an introvert? What typically happens is the word introvert is automatically biased to a negative connotation. So you automatically feel you're at a disadvantage, saying, okay, this extrovert is going to take up the entire conversation, or I'm going to have to find my way in, or they're just going to say something that is totally useless, right? Well, what's happened here is you've already walked in with a point of view, you've already walked in with a judgment, and you've already walked in with a conclusion about how that interaction is going to go. So when I'm working with people, part of it is, okay, what are all the strengths you have as an introvert, right? Like you said, introspection, you have some really good insights, and believing that that can be used as a good leadership. You can develop into a good leader um, as an introvert. So in cybersecurity as well, if introverts are high, and now that they've been elevated to this board level where they have to talk strategy, they have to be negotiating things, influencing stakeholders, that is a skill they need to learn, to be like, how can I do this without changing my personality? Because then you're just faking it, right? And it doesn't work in the long run, because then you feel like that's a slippery slope down to burnout and just all sorts of other things. So from an introversion standpoint, there are studies out there that say an introverted leader is actually a complement to a team of extroverts, and vice versa. An extrovert leader can, again, it's a trained thing, can be really helpful to introverts in helping drawing out those ideas, creating the safe space for expression to happen. And if it's a mixed crowd, this is the part about, as we cover in the diverse high performing team, is from an introvert extrovert slice, are you giving everybody equal opportunity to express themselves and contribute? And it's a very intentional process, making sure everybody's thoughts. I did a talk for Purdue University a couple of months ago, and People in the room were all extroverts. People all online were introverts. Most questions came from online and not in the room because some people are afraid of public speaking as well. So it's very fascinating to me. Public speaking is pretty rampant across introverts or extroverts. It's a very fascinating thing when you start to work with people, especially from that angle. And that's why I picked that. It wasn't so much about gender diversity or one, because you can't really separate that, right? Because there's such an intersection of so many other things. But the introversion extroversion is very fascinating to me. And I have met so many introverts now. Every other person I'm meeting is like, yeah, I'm an introvert. You work with introverts? What do you do? Tell me
Mhm.
more. And so it's super exciting. But yeah, there are nuances there. To your point, if you were working with me, we would find a way where you would be in that 30-minute conversation. Even if you spoke for 1 minute, you would feel like you made your mark without all this dialoguing that's going on in your head, because that's draining.
I think with extroverts, you just need to think aloud. Versus an introvert,
Yes.
they're they're
Yes.
they're being more
Yes.
thoughtful, and it's more inside. The voice is more inside than outside.
Yes. 100%.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that you kind of reminded me of Monday mornings in corporate America, right? When I used to go into the office,
Status
and thanks to
reporting. Yeah.
COVID, nobody does that anymore, or
Mhm.
not many people do it anymore. Monday morning meeting, you're sitting around before the meeting would start, and you're shooting some kind of socialization minute about
Yes.
how was
Yes.
your weekend.
Yes.
To
I don't
me,
care. Yeah. I don't want to hear it. Yeah.
why is
Very
that
true.
important, right? But the
Yeah.
extrovert amongst us, they go like, "Oh yeah, I went to this thing. There was this club, and there was a concert, and blah blah blah, and this and that and that and that." I didn't do anything. I slept. I enjoyed my time off. I did
Yeah.
not do anything, and that was
Yeah.
I don't have to go out and do all those things.
True, but then you have to be comfortable saying you slept and own it. That's part of the thing. That's we think that what they're doing is more cool than what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
If I slept, my sister is a movie director in Bollywood. I mean, one of her movies she just worked on is on Amazon Prime. It's fantastic. She's an introvert, but then she runs a set with 1,000 people on it, right? And then she's
Wow.
screaming her head off. But then she is very clear about her alone time, and the days she's shooting, much like your own schedule, it's a packed 16, 18 hours days of shooting outside in a studio, all those things. She is a diehard introvert. I mean, she was here last summer. We went to a picnic at our sailing club here in Connecticut, and I had her put her name badge on, and she said, "Does this mean I have to talk to people today?" So my best friend is an introvert. Same thing. She works for a bank. Same situation. But I think it's understanding how you are wired and being okay with that, and not automatic our own self bias that there's a negative connotation because I slept. That's less than someone who went maybe skydiving over the weekend,
Yeah.
right? So it's that it's little bit it's a lot of those self concepts. And I gave a talk for entrepreneurs recently. We covered the whole gamut of how do extroverts think, and rightfully so. Some of them think out loud, some of them don't. So yeah.
So you went through this journey, right? And I can
Yes.
tell you that I interview a lot of entrepreneurs on the show, right?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
know a lot of them. I work with them. I've been working with them for 25 years.
Yeah.
I call it deep scars on your back, right?
Yes.
You
Yes.
learn from every experience when you are, when you're in a corporate America or you're in a corporate setting, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of facilities available to you that you don't
Hmm.
realize they're just there. Like HR is there.
Hmm.
Payroll is taken care of. You know, if you need to make an appointment, there you go. There's an admin or something like that will
Yes.
take care of it.
You can pick up the phone. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have an IT issue, something wrong with your laptop, magically gets fixed, right? Because
Hmm.
there's those facilities. That's what I mean by facilities, resources,
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and other things like that. But when you go through that journey yourself, where none of those systems exist, right? Everybody has pretty deep scars that they came through and
Yes.
through their learning. How has been your experience? Besides doing all this great work you're doing, right,
Hmm.
within the cybersecurity world, and fighting your own demons and challenges related
Yes.
to giving birth to this child called, Think Design
Yes.
Cyber.
Oh, yes. It wasn't all doom and gloom. I have to say that, right? We were pretty excited about the article and the award and such. But and the good part was for me, the one thing, like you said, the demons, or other challenges was Brian and I partnering, right? That was the first year we had got together, and I was going through this whole I want to manifest relationship stage, and then suddenly he came in my life, and then boom, 5-6 months later we were official, and boom, in the same year we started writing this paper, and I was like, wait a minute, so like, so just that realization was exciting, and then was the part about, okay, now I want to work with him. How do we make this work? So that was the first sort of learning experience, and then it was interesting. I was swimming one day as we started doing this process, and it was as if something held me back in the pool, right? There's nothing in the pool, you're in the water. And something like grabbed me in the back, speaking about demons. And it was just like, you can't do this. It was just my entire body resisted the idea of moving into this entrepreneurial space. And that's when things were, I was like, what is going on here? And then so fear of visibility, fear of failure, fear of what outcomes, right? And I mean, I came to the US when I was 21, and I've done pretty well in my corporate career. But that sort of self-belief, that didn't fully translate over. Instead, what it did was literally excavate or exhume all those demons that I had buried years ago. And I had to address them as we were doing it, and it was gut wrenching because it became so raw, especially because I was working with Brian. So now this is somebody I'm in a relationship. Year one, we started living together. COVID happened. Now we're starting to think about Think.Design.Cyber. I haven't quite sussed him out yet. My sister is here. So all these things are going on. But I really wanted to also make it work. And just finding that balance was so hard. And I started to show up as who I really was, right? Those are the parts you don't want to show someone in your first year also. And he's been very forgiving. I mean, he himself was going through the same process. I mean, although he worked for himself besides that, but again, partnering with someone at this level was a whole new journey, which I think is now a very overused word, but it really was a journey. So that was one. And then personally, that fear of visibility was huge because growing up in India, I grew up in a caste system framework, and so our family comes from one of the lowest castes. And so putting myself out there meant, oh, if I get known for my work, then people will find out. And then there will be all this judgment and there will be so those things, like we said, we carry with us. But when you're truly becoming an entrepreneur, you're your own brand, right? I coach people on personal branding. That for me was, I had to practice what I was preaching, right? Getting over that. That was a huge one for me, the fear of visibility. Not for the lack of skill, not for the lack of the inability to speak, not for the lack of, how am I going to look, nothing like that. But it was purely coming out of that fear, the social conditioning about, hey, you are in certain hierarchy. You should not be.
Stay in your lane. Yeah.
Stay in your lane, exactly.
Your mind tells you, stay in your lane. Why are you doing this other
Yeah.
thing? You don't belong there.
You don't belong there. And because from that, but you can never overcome it. Even if economically you get to a certain stage, you never lose the label. So if you got the best one, you're great. If you got you lucked out on the lowest one, you don't, right? And it sticks with you. So you'll always be, hey, Prachee, from this, you're this person who over. So then that becomes your identity and your story. And I didn't want that ever. That was the reason I came to the US, to not have to identify with that, right? And then suddenly that became a true possibility, that as people dig up on my background, where I come from, blah, blah, blah. And then that was a big one that I had to overcome. And it took several
But
months.
how much, so Prachee, I go through a similar kind of a situation, right? But what I realized over the years, this is not true about me 25, 30 years ago, right? Because I had not matured at that time.
Yeah.
Right now, I've matured enough to know that there are certain things that your mind takes the thing, and even though it's a tiny, minute thing, blows it up out of proportion and says, oh my God, this is a crisis,
Totally.
And it's all in your mind, and it's not because of your framework of who you are.
Yes.
It just turns it into this. Your mind does this to you, a trick on you,
Yes.
Versus the reality of the situation, no one cares.
Yes.
No one cares, especially in the United States. No one cares.
Exactly.
I don't know about India. I don't want to overspeak and go over bounds here.
Yes.
I don't know about India. I don't know about the fact that maybe there is a caste system that says if you are XYZ caste, how dare you talk to anyone, in corporate? You can't be manager, you can't be
Not quite
VP.
like that. No, no. But there is, yes, you carry this in your head. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you start this journey, and now I want to get to some specifics.
Hmm.
Let's go through a case study of a client that had
Hmm.
success, with the work that you had done with them. So if you could take us before and after of
Yeah.
what that study was, that would be great.
Yes. So this is a female client. I'll give you two examples, quick ones. So one female client, Caribbean Indian, going for a deputy CISO role. So CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer role, um, and had tremendous record of performance. Right, awesome budget management, tremendous record around security management, all those things. But the feedback she kept getting for that, her first sort of, the C level role, even if it was a deputy CISO, was, you're not ready, you're not kind of, presence, gravitas, kind of the same language that women generally get, right? Executive presence is a big one, which is actually no definite. What does that even mean, right?
A
And
blue
so
suit, and you have to be 6'2". So if you're five foot
basically,
one, 5'1", woman
yeah.
or man, then, you're not executive, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And it was just like, oh, gravitas. Okay. So like, so anyway, so yeah, so she was getting all those feedback with a tremendous track record. And then and she was, to some extent soft spoken, right? She wasn't out loud and loud, right? She was also an introvert. And I commend her for getting to where she was. When she came to me, that was a problem, and she really wanted to get to this role, and she had about a year and a half window, because that's how much sort of like the promotion cycles go, is in the financial services industry also. And so in working with her, we discovered, the soft spokenness, cultural conditioning, why is she thinking that? And it's like, if she was, how would she talk if she didn't have any of that? And so it was a very different tempo and tone that she adopted. The other thing we noticed was some bias, yes, but it was her people telling her she wasn't ready, was because she was talking to the wrong stakeholders, right? So in sort of gender diversity, a big common term is sponsorship, right? You have mentors, you have advisors, you have, all these people, coaches even. Sponsor is a person who speaks for you when you're not in the room, right? It's your PR person when you're not there. She didn't really have a bunch of those, right? And she did not know the promotion process and who the key decision makers were, right? Because once you start, so at every level the game changes, right? When you're sort of in that level where up until your manager has an influence and say, that's okay. But when you really start getting into those executive level roles or senior leadership roles, the game really changes, and you really have to be very intentional about it. And the networking was a big issue for her, being a and she's like, this is shallow. She's a techie person, right? She knows how to fix stuff, she knows how to do this really well, show numbers, show statistics. But really having to get her into that place where she could charm the room and still be respected as a woman, right? Speaking the business strategy language, tying cybersecurity outcomes to business strategy. That were all the things we worked on, figured out who her key stakeholders were, getting her sponsors. So this was a long 8 month process. Happy to report, after that, as of, I want to say, the last cycle, she is now a deputy CISO. So that was a very, very
Wow.
cool um, thing to overcome. And much like the entrepreneurial journey, a lot of hers was the inner demons that she had to overcome to go get into that action mode, right? Getting over, my work should speak itself, which a lot of us do, actually, the people who are immigrants here. So that was number one. The number two, I'm also excited about, was a male client in the UK. This was in the healthcare industry, in customer relations. And this person was very non-confrontational. Now, being, white male, non-confrontational, did not like to, to get into conflict. And ironically, I don't know how he ended up in customer relations, but he's like a good senior level manager. But when it came to tough situation, he would freeze, right? And so he would, in speaking directly with clients, he would acquiesce to whatever their demands were. And sometimes clients can be very unreasonable. The drill. And so for him, it was getting harder and harder. And so in working with him, work through the same issues. What is going on? Cultural conditioning. Saying yes was a way his dad was showing up in the family, right? But also this thing about, you cannot, holding your emotions in, stuff like that was also another one. He's also an introvert, so getting to that level was a big one for him. And so being able to express himself in as few words as possible, making sure you're getting your point across. Again, that work was 6 months. It wasn't a more, maybe 4-ish. 6 months is kind of like how we dragged it out with time off and stuff, but 4-ish months. That was really good, and he got promoted to the next level as well. That was the one thing that was tripping him up around clients, and he was able to actually offload a long-term client who was a basic pain in their rear as a company, although long-standing, not that big a size of business that he would bring in, but they had held on to him. But he was the one who ended up offloading that client of his. So those two were my big wins last year.
Amazing.
Which I was personally very happy about. Yeah.
So I've been in the IT world for a long while. Right now, it's more focused on e-commerce specifically, and that's what I have specialized in over the past, and growing businesses, not just the tech side of it, right? And in the cybersecurity world, I would say that there are so many threats that happen on a pretty regular basis. Like the usual ones, especially related to e-commerce, has to do with credit card file getting stolen, customer files with private information,
data loss,
medical data loss type things, theft, data theft and stuff, dark web, stealing and credit card files and selling it and stuff like that. Even it happened to one of the largest credit bureaus a couple of years ago. Right. So those are the kind of things that I know about that happens in my world. And then you hear on the news, I don't want to say any specific media channel because I don't want haters. There are very recently that one of those headlines that we heard was cyber hacking of a power plant, for example. Right. So there are things like that are happening, and on top of it, I believe, even though it may or may not have happened, I believe that AI could be used also in a negative way too.
Totally.
In the cybersecurity world, where you're not sitting, it's not your. I forgot the name of the TV series. Mr. Robot, I think, with the hoodie on, sitting there hacking. It doesn't have to be a person. You could have intelligent AI bots that are doing that for you.
100%. There's bot farms out there that are doing that. Yeah.
What are those threats, in your opinion, and challenges in the cybersecurity world today in 2023 that we should be aware of? Like, especially this show is being watched by entrepreneurs, founders, and other people who are responsible for businesses. What advice do you have for them? From what they should be looking out for, and how can they remedy some of those things?
Yeah. The one thing I will say, the extent of threats pretty much, or the breadth of threats are pretty much, few categories, right? Now, how they play out in a large company versus a small company, right? And like you said, there are nation threats out there, and then there are people who are true, what is it called? Bad actors, right? And then there are these teenagers who are trying to, I put them in these like 2-3 personas. Right now, people who are intent on causing harm are constantly scanning for vulnerabilities, right? So large company or small, that's their entry point. Now, what they do once they get into your environment is totally your responsibility. And this is where a lot of the companies sort of fumble over, right? Most of it in the large corporations is called cyber hygiene. Do you have your, things in place? Do you have your right technologies in place? Are they updated? Are you doing a patching on time? Blah, 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 blah. All those things translate at a smaller level for, small or medium-sized businesses, right? Especially e-commerce and things like that. If you have a store, you're providing coaching services, right? If you're a solopreneur, if you have a decent-sized team, those things also apply to us, right? Now, with cybersecurity, what's happened is become a way to do fraud. Like you said, you get hold of my files. The cybersecurity aspect of it is you get into my environment, you get access to my most important data, and now you can walk out with it, right? So there's a concept of zero trust in the corporate environment that is out there. It's part of Biden's executive order last year or a couple of years ago, which is a strategy saying, it's zero trust associated with any interaction. So presidential motorcade example, at any point, you should know what you're protecting, what are your most important pieces. And then you should be monitoring at that sort of lever to say what is going in and out into my environment, right? Monitoring that for sure. So if someone comes into your environment, how do they even like, or let me simplify this. Someone gets to your house, if they're able to break through your main gate, right? They're coming into your backyard. How do they get access to your house? That kind of thing. So thinking in layers like that. Same applies from an e-commerce standpoint for a small scale thing. Ransomware is a big one. You hear that all the time. One interesting thing I'd point out about news is, and this is a pretty known example in Australia, I forget the name of the company that lost their data recently. Um, the PR team of the company said, oh, it was a very sophisticated cyber attack. And then the minister goes in the next, some other press conference. She said, no, it wasn't. That's the thing people don't understand. There is so much focus on threats and attacks, which is, like you said, a heist movie, right? This is what we teach in design thinking. Go look at Ocean's 11. The very first one with Sinatra was done in the 80s. George Clooney's came much later. That thought process is what your actor is using. He's thinking ahead of you. So what we're teaching is out-thinking your adversaries. So just tying that back to what I was saying, people think it's a very sophisticated attack because of the way they got into your system. But once they get in, how they move around is pretty, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you go do root cause analysis on some of those events, you'll start to see it's a very similar pattern. So it's truly up to us to understand. And sometimes it gets complicated, but there are a lot of good services out there that you can use, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. Larger one, you need a much more larger scale things. There's regulations involved. There's all these other overheads that you have to take care of. So ransomware is there. I mean, you already talked about digital to physical, right? If they can get to my power grid and wreak havoc, IoT is a big one. All of us are connected tremendously, right? Do you need
all the webcams and Alexas
all the
and all sorts of
webcams, everything, right? And dark web, obviously, make sure your simple things is make sure your camera is, covered when you're not there and stuff like that. So those are simple things that you can do. A big one that we pretty much give away our data all the time, which is related to privacy, but also cybersecurity, like, giving up your information in every apps. I actually tend not to save my credit cards in a lot of different places because I don't know what their level of security is, right? Because then I don't have to deal with the headache of somebody stealing my information. For individuals, I always make sure to have credit monitoring going on, because even if they get their data, what they do with it is that, right? And this kind of threat existed before. And you talk about industrial espionage, right? People walking away with your secrets and or walking away with your most vital information is now translated into the digital world, is what we now call cybersecurity, essentially, right? So that insider risk in companies, that's a big one. But that existed always, right? It's the format that has changed. Those will be the few things that people are worried about. And you go to Davos and you hear the whole thing, and what keeps up CEOs up at night is cybersecurity, because that has become a huge liability, essentially, for companies, right? Because it's reputational risk. You lose your data, you're done for. And especially if you're a key industry player, you can bring big systems down, right? You could wreak havoc with exchanges. You could wreak havoc with the power grids. Hospitals is a big one. We had the Boston hospital, right? I mean, people's health will be affected. We're all wearing our wearable tech or medical devices even, right? Now that they can be connected. So there's a lot of different ways people can do it. Those threats existed before in different forms. They've just evolved and can become much easier to execute. It's not necessarily that somebody else, like students in college, but that's the thing. How can a college grad be able to come into your system? He's obviously outthinking you. So what's happening in this world is this imbalance of focus on threats and attacks, and what do we really need to do to protect ourselves, and what are we really losing, right? And so now, like, I have credit monitoring going on all the time, and if credit monitoring and even sort of this identity protection as well. I think I forget which one I use, but I get reports from them from time to time, right? So making sure just to keep yourself protected is extremely important. And children and older parents, for sure. That's a straight up fraud.
I mean, if you think about it, technology and access to systems is kind of universal across the board. I mean, if you think about, like, even your car is a gigantic computer on wheels. That's what it is right now. It's no longer like mechanical parts. It's more computer parts in that car than anything. And if you look at cars like Tesla, that's even more, more than usual mechanical parts from Ford or GM or any
Yeah.
of the other
And
traditional car
you
companies.
relying on that company to make sure nobody gets into your car and actually drives you off a cliff, right? So
Or,
if they
yeah,
can,
or I might have bad intentions and I may want
yeah,
to do that to damage a stock of like Ford or GM or something
correct,
like that. And
correct.
I do that by taking control of the computer's car and just causing a havoc across the board.
Exactly. Exactly. You never know. Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. That's why I prefer a not a stick shift, but I grew up driving a stick shift, but yes.
You're not going to tell me you have a horse carriage, do you?
No. I do turn off a lot of the app, notifications and data updates and stuff that goes on. I do them myself. Yeah. That one I'm pretty particular about. No, not a horse carriage, although it's fun.
Well, when it comes to the C-level executives in the organization, because
Yeah.
every company is different. Sometimes those roles roll up to the CEO or
Yes.
president. Sometimes there you have a CIO, you have a
Yeah.
CTO, you said CISO, CISO, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of roles. What is what advice do you have for them to create
Mm-hmm.
to invest in proper executive coaching to make
Yes.
sure that the line of people who are coming up are getting trained to actually have that organization? Because in a technical organization, one of the challenges that I've seen, in my opinion, is that the expectation is, well, they're really good at what they do. Insert the term programming, coding, hacking,
Yeah.
security, whatever, writing scripts, bash scripts,
Yeah.
whatever, right? Insert the thing into that. And then, but the problem is I don't believe that there's any kind of responsibility around making sure that people are growing in other aspects also,
Yes.
not just technical skill set that the
Yeah.
person probably is doing it in their basement and learning it on their own and getting
Yeah.
ahead of it, right? But there's other softer skills and other skills that maybe
Yes.
they're not getting that coaching.
Yes.
So what do you think is that responsibility, or how would you say, not necessarily
Yeah.
responsibility, I don't want it to be a blame process here,
Yes.
but what
Yes.
does great look like from a leadership standpoint to invest in executive coaching?
Great question. That is an aspect I cover a lot on the people side of cybersecurity, right? And it's not just executive coaching though. It's non-executive coaching also, because the pipeline has to start early on. And rightfully, like you said, cybersecurity is seen as such a technical field in one direction. All these personalities that have become concentrated in cybersecurity, right? So think about it, and I think in systems, I think in big picture. So there's this concentration of personalities. Now cybersecurity's own position has elevated it into the boardroom, right? So what could have been a techie person is going through this, a tech management growth track, is now suddenly in the people management space also. What people don't realize is all the curriculum, be it professional certifications, even college grade programs, unlike people in other areas, operations, MBA, they all go through rotational training programs. They're not like, they don't walk into a company, right, and learn everything. They do a 1-2 year rotation. That is absent in cybersecurity. So that is some of the things we actually bring up when we talk to clients about their talent, especially now that there's a talent war and they have to focus on retention and growth, right? From a diversity perspective, now having worked in the corporate workforce and having, helping people getting to the CISO level and CISOs themselves, also board members. Brian also trains corporate board members. But what we have noticed is they're also absent from those inclusion, belonging, diversity like areas, right? The amount of people I see nominated from cybersecurity departments to, let's say, an emerging leader program or something to advance, a particular ethnic group, maybe one cyber person out of everyone else. Why, right? To your point, you get so siloed, and they themselves are siloed. They are trained to be specialists. They're trained to put their blinders on and just look at that, right? So the aspect of change management, which cybersecurity is a big aspect, and I'm speaking corporate. It's different when it's a smaller business. It's a little bit different setup, but I'm thinking from a larger corporate environment. It starts to play because it becomes a culture change, right? What happens, it becomes a blame the end user game. You have to click on, why did you click on this link, right? You're trying to train them on certain things. Don't click on this fish, or don't fall for this phishing campaign or social engineering campaign. But the point is, the whole idea of the zero trust strategy is My end user should be able to click on links all day long. It's our job as cybersecurity professionals to protect them. Now, the only thing you're training them for is this technical piece, which keeps changing, right? Technology keeps changing. We're now talking about cryptography blowing up, right, with quantum computing coming in. So that's going to be a major, pain in the ass. But then how do you teach these people? So now, if, for example, if your company is in code red, much like Google is because of Chat GPT, it's a survival issue, right?